The office was alive with the usual hum of computers, the soft clicking of keyboards and the low murmur of conversations. Sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, bouncing off the polished floors and the sleek surfaces of modern desks. On any normal day, the office would have felt like a place of controlled energy, where everyone had a role, and every task moved in a rhythm that made sense. But today was far from normal. It started with a sudden alarm on the main monitors. Red warning signs flashed across the screens, and an uneasy silence replaced the background noise. Then the phone started ringing, a harsh, impatient chorus that echoed through the open office. The CEO, a man used to being in control of everything, was already standing by the largest monitor, his eyes scanning the lines of code and charts that made no sense to him. "What happened?" he barked, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. The words were sharp, demanding, full of urgency and panic. Employees froze for a moment, glancing at each other nervously. The CEO never raised his voice unless it was an emergency. And right now, everyone understood that this was serious. The IT team had already rushed to their stations. Fingers flew across keyboards as they tried to trace the problem, but nothing seemed to work. Every command they typed returned errors. Every fix seemed to fail. Sweat formed on the brows of the technicians, their calm faces betraying the tension building inside. This was not just a minor glitch. This was a system crash that could cost the company millions in hours if it wasn't fixed immediately. The CEO's pacing grew faster. He walked back and forth in front of the monitors, muttering under his breath and occasionally snapping at anyone who came too close. "How can this happen? We have safeguards. We have backups. Tell me why this is failing." His frustration was palpable. Every employee felt it pressing down on them, a heavy weight that made it hard to think straight. On the far side of the office, the janitor quietly moved among the rows of desks, pushing a mop and collecting trash. He had been here long enough to understand the rhythm of the building. He knew when to sweep quietly, when to avoid the main areas, and how to be invisible even in the busiest hours. Today he noticed the unusual tension immediately. He paused for a moment, resting his hand on the mop handle, observing the chaos. It was unusual even for him to see the CEO so unsettled, so visibly frustrated. The phones wouldn't stop ringing, and every employee seemed to be speaking at once. "The backup server isn't responding. The database is down. We can't process transactions." Panic was growing like wildfire, spreading from desk to desk. The CEO slammed his hand onto the edge of the monitor table, a sharp sound that made a few people jump. "I don't want excuses," he shouted. "I want results." The IT manager, a young woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, spoke up. "We're trying everything we can, sir, but the system is completely locked. We need a few more minutes." "Minutes?" the CEO snapped, spinning around to face her. "Do you know what a few minutes could cost us? Millions, do you understand that?" His words were harsh, but they were not just words, they were real. Every second of downtime meant lost clients, lost deals, lost credibility. His mind raced through the numbers, the charts, the endless reports he kept tucked away in his office. And yet right now all of it was meaningless because the system that held it together was failing. Employees moved quickly, some checking servers in the back, some trying to troubleshoot on their own computers. Everyone was focused, yet the tension made it hard to think clearly. People whispered to each other, their voices low but urgent. "This isn't supposed to happen. I've never seen it go down like this before. How could the backups fail?" Amid all this chaos, the janitor's eyes wandered to the young girl standing quietly near the lobby doors. She was small, maybe 10 or 11, carrying a backpack and wearing a simple dress. She had come to visit her father after school, just a casual visit like any other day. But the scene in front of her was anything but casual. She could see the panic in people's faces, the way the CEO's hands shook as he gestured at the monitors, the way the IT team's eyes darted between screens and phones. She didn't say anything at first. She simply watched, taking in every detail with a calmness that stood out sharply against the chaos around her. It wasn't fear or confusion that made her still. It was observation. She noticed things that no one else did. The patterns of movement, the repeated errors on the screens, the small overlooked messages in the system logs. She didn't know much about computers, but she had a way of seeing connections others missed. A few employees noticed her standing there, and whispers spread quickly. "Who is that? Why is she here? Does she belong here? The CEO, however, was too wrapped up in his panic to pay attention to anything outside the monitors and the staff, frantically trying to solve the problem. He stomped his foot, frustrated, muttering words under his breath that no one could quite catch. He had always prided himself on having a well-oiled machine, a company that ran efficiently under his guidance. But today that machine had stopped and he had no control. He felt the walls of his office closing in, the pressure of expectations from investors, clients, and his own pride pressing down on him. The janitor's daughter tilted her head slightly, noticing the small blinking red lights on the main server that seemed to repeat in a pattern. She pointed at one, asking a quiet question. "Why is that one blinking like that?" Her voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of chaos, but it carried a certain clarity that made a few people pause. A young intern, curious and hopeful, walked over. We've been trying to figure that out for a while," he said cautiously. "We think it's part of the main system crash." She frowned slightly. "But why would it keep doing that if everything else is frozen?" The intern blinked. He wasn't sure, but the simplicity of her question made him think. Maybe he had been overcomplicating things. Maybe the answer was simpler than everyone thought. Meanwhile, the CEO had turned his back from the monitors for a brief moment and noticed the girl. "Who is that?" he demanded. His voice startled her and she looked up, meeting his gaze. He saw something in her eyes, a quiet confidence, a calmness that contrasted with the chaos. For a moment, he forgot the system crash, the millions at stake, the pressure mounting from every direction. He simply looked at her, puzzled. "Just someone visiting her father," someone whispered from the side. The CEO waved them off, returning his focus to the monitors. But the image of the small girl standing quietly amidst panic stuck in his mind. He couldn't explain why, but something about her presence felt important, though he quickly dismissed it. There were bigger problems to handle. Time continued to pass painfully slow. Each second stretched longer than the last, and frustration built with every failed attempt to fix the system. The CEO's hands were now rubbing his temples, a sign of stress that was unusual even for him. He had faced tough situations before, but nothing like this. Nothing that made him feel completely powerless. The employees tried to stay focused, but the panic was contagious. Some muttered under their breath, questioning the company's safety measures. Others stared blankly at screens, waiting for any sign of improvement. The CEO barked orders, repeated questions, and urgent demands. But the system remained frozen, stubbornly refusing to cooperate. Through all this, the janitor's daughter remained calm. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but she continued to observe, to notice details others missed. Her quiet presence was a stark contrast to the chaos, and slowly a few employees began to pay attention to her, wondering why someone so young could be so composed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the CEO slammed his fist onto the desk in frustration. "I need a solution now," he shouted, his voice echoing through the office. The stress, the fear, and the pressure of responsibility seemed to have reached their peak. Everyone froze, knowing that the next moment could decide the company's fate. And in that tense, frozen moment, all eyes, unwillingly, almost subconsciously, turned toward the quiet observer standing by the lobby. The janitor's daughter, who had simply come to visit her father, was about to step into a situation far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The office didn't know it yet, but she would change everything. This is part 1, around 1,400 words, focused on building tension, character dynamics, and setting the scene for the rest of the story. It ends on a cliffhanger, keeping the audience eager for part 2. If you want, I can move on to part 2 next and continue the story in the same style and word length. The office was still in chaos, but the tension had begun to take on a sharper edge. Phones rang continuously. Red error messages blinked on every screen, and the CEO's frustration was palpable. He had shouted, stomped, and demanded, but nothing seemed to work. Every minute that passed felt heavier than the one before, and the employees could feel it pressing down on them like a thick, invisible weight. In the corner of the lobby, the janitor's daughter stood quietly, clutching her backpack. She had been watching the monitors, listening to the frantic conversations and noticing patterns that no one else had. She didn't know much about computers, but she understood logic, the way things fit together, and the way small details often revealed bigger truths. Her calm presence, so different from the panic around her, drew a few curious glances from nearby employees. One of the interns, a boy with nervous eyes, edged closer. Are you waiting for your dad?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded. "Yes, but why is everyone so upset?" He shrugged. "The main system crashed. Nothing is working. We can't access client accounts, orders, or reports. Everything is frozen." He glanced at the glowing red screens. "It's bad." She tilted her head, observing the monitors. Her eyes lingered on a small blinking light on one of the servers. It was subtle, easy to miss, but she noticed it. "Why is that one blinking like that?" she asked quietly. The intern frowned. I think it's just part of the crash, but why only that one?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. He looked at her, unsure how to answer. "I don't know. We haven't figured that part out yet." She studied the light for a few seconds, then pointed. "Maybe it's important." The intern blinked, and for the first time he felt a small spark of hope. Everyone else had been so focused on panic and complicated fixes that they had overlooked something simple. He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." Meanwhile, the CEO had noticed the girl. At first he thought she was just another visitor, insignificant in the face of the crisis. But there was something in the way she observed everything, so calm, so focused, that caught his attention. He paused in front of the monitors and watched her from a distance. "Who is she?" he barked at the nearest employee. "She's the janitor's daughter, sir," someone muttered. The CEO turned back to the monitors, muttering under his breath. "We don't have time for distractions." But the girl, undeterred by the chaos or the angry voices, walked closer to the servers. Her small steps were quiet, almost unnoticed, yet purposeful. She leaned slightly toward one of the screens, pointing at a specific detail in the system logs. "Look here," she said softly. "Something doesn't make sense. Isn't this supposed to be different?" The IT manager, a woman in her 30s with a sharp mind and years of experience, glanced at her, puzzled. "That's unusual," she said. Her tone carried a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "How did you notice that?" "I just saw it," the girl replied simply. The manager frowned, then walked over to take a closer look. Sure enough, the pattern the girl pointed out was strange. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but it didn't fit the usual sequence. The manager's fingers hovered over the keyboard, considering the possibility. The CEO, now curious despite himself, stepped closer. "Wait," he said, his voice softer than before. "Did she just—" "Yes," someone whispered. The room fell slightly quieter, as if holding its breath. The girl didn't speak much. She simply pointed out details that were unusual, using simple logic that cut through the panic like a knife. "If this is wrong, maybe everything else is failing because of it," she suggested. The IT manager exchanged glances with her team. It was risky, but at this point any new lead was worth considering. They began to follow the girl's suggestions, carefully adjusting settings, checking connections, and reviewing the highlighted sections of the system. The CEO watched, his disbelief growing. He had been in charge of this company for years, seen countless problems and solved many impossible situations. But he had never seen a child, someone with no formal IT training, point out a problem so clearly, so calmly. His frustration softened into something closer to shock, and for the first time he felt uncertainty. Minutes passed, tense and slow. The employees worked together, cautiously testing the suggestions the girl made. Each adjustment brought small signs of progress. Screens that had been frozen for hours flickered back to life. The red warnings began to fade. A few of the employees exchanged stunned glances. Could it really be this simple? Could everything have been overlooked because no one noticed the tiny blinking light? The CEO's hands, which had been tightly clenched at his sides, loosened slightly. He stayed silent, watching the scene unfold, still unsure if it was real or just a fluke. But then the system started to stabilize. Orders began processing, client accounts became accessible, and the once impossible errors started disappearing. Gasps of relief spread through the office. Some employees hugged each other quietly, while others simply exhaled, feeling the weight lift from their shoulders. The CEO, who had been tense and on the verge of panic, felt a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had been ready to call in every expert he knew, to throw money and resources at the problem. Yet here it was, solved calmly and methodically, by a child who had simply noticed what others had missed. The janitor, quietly standing at the side, watched his daughter with a proud smile hidden behind his neutral expression. He had always known she was smart, curious, and capable, But seeing it in action on such a scale, in a room full of adults panicking, was a different experience entirely. The CEO finally spoke, his voice a little quieter, less sharp than before. "How did you do that?" The girl shrugged. "I just looked carefully. Sometimes small things matter more than big things." The CEO took a step back, his mind racing. He had always believed that experience and expertise were the only things that mattered in solving critical problems. But here, in front of his own eyes, he realized that perspective, observation, and calm reasoning could sometimes surpass all the training and knowledge in the world. Employees began to whisper among themselves, sharing their amazement. She did it. She fixed it. All this panic. And she just solved it. Even the IT manager, who had years of experience and had handled countless crises, nodded in agreement. I don't know how she noticed that," she admitted. But it worked. She really worked it out. The CEO, still processing the situation, felt a mix of emotions. Pride, relief, and a strange humility he wasn't used to. He had been ready to lose control, ready to panic, and yet here was a quiet, composed child showing everyone the way. His frustration melted into gratitude, and for the first time in hours he allowed himself to simply watch. The girl, still calm, looked around the room. She didn't seek attention or praise. She had pointed out the details, suggested what might be wrong, and then stepped back. Her focus had been on solving the problem, not on the chaos surrounding her. She had been steady, patient, and observant, qualities that now seemed more valuable than anyone had realized. The office slowly began to return to normal. Phones stopped ringing frantically, screens returned to their usual displays, and employees exchanged smiles and relieved nods. The CEO, finally able to speak without frustration, addressed the room. "Everyone, take a moment. We just saw something remarkable." He glanced at the girl. You helped save the company today." "Thank you." The girl smiled faintly. "I just noticed something." The CEO took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past hour lift from his shoulders. He realized how close they had come to disaster, and how easily it could have gone differently if not for the sharp eyes and calm mind of someone no one had expected. He looked around at his staff, who were still amazed, still processing what had happened. He realized that humility and openness were just as important as knowledge and expertise. The janitor, still quiet, came forward and gently took his daughter's hand. "Let's go home," he said softly. She nodded, giving one last glance at the office, at the chaos now fading into calm, and walked with him toward the exit. The CEO watched them leave, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had been ready to panic, to push, to demand solutions. But the solution had come from the most unexpected place. A small child, calm and observant, had reminded everyone that sometimes the answers were simpler than they seemed, and that anyone, no matter their age or title, could have the insight needed to solve even the biggest problems. That day left a lasting impression on the office. The story of what had happened spread quickly, and employees began to see the value in observation, patience, and fresh perspectives. The janitor's daughter became a quiet legend, not because she wanted recognition, but because she had shown that even in moments of panic and fear, calm thinking and careful attention could change everything. And while the CEO returned to his office, reflecting on what had just happened, he realized something important. Control. Power and experience were valuable, but they were not everything. Sometimes insight came from the most unexpected places, and the greatest lessons came when humility allowed you to listen, even to those you might least expect. The office had survived the crisis, but more importantly, everyone had learned a lesson they would not forget. And in the quiet of the evening, as the sun set and the last employees left for the day, the janitor's daughter had already returned home, her backpack still on her shoulder, completely unaware of the impact she had made. No one knew when she might appear again, or what problems she might solve next. But one thing was certain. She had changed the way everyone in that office thought about observation, calmness, and the unexpected power of insight. The office had returned to a quiet hum, but the memory of the crash lingered in the air like a shadow. Employees were busy reviewing what had happened, checking logs and trying to understand how a system that seemed so strong had failed so suddenly. The CEO, still pacing slightly, kept glancing at the servers, the blinking lights now calming down, and thinking about the small figure who had brought everything back to life. Everyone had gone back to their desks, but a subtle tension remained. It wasn't fear this time. It was curiosity and disbelief. How could a child, someone with no formal IT training, understand the problem so quickly? How had she noticed what no one else could see, even with years of experience and advanced degrees? Questions buzzed through the office like invisible whispers, each one growing louder in people's minds. The IT manager was still staring at her monitor, replaying the sequence of events in her mind. She could not shake the feeling that what had just happened went beyond luck. There was something methodical, almost intuitive in the way the girl had noticed the irregular pattern. She called one of her senior technicians over. "Look at this," she said quietly, pointing at the logs. "She saw this immediately, but we've been looking at it for hours and didn't even notice it." The technician frowned, running his fingers through his hair. "It doesn't make sense," he admitted. "We are trained to detect this, but somehow we missed it." "How?" "Perspective," the manager said softly. "Sometimes being too deep in the problem blinds you to the simple details." She didn't have years of assumptions or routines in her head. She just saw what was there. Meanwhile, the CEO had retreated to his office, but he couldn't sit still. His mind replayed the events again and again. He thought about the millions of dollars that could have been lost, the clients who could have been affected, and the embarrassment that might have spread through the media if the system had stayed down. But most of all, he kept thinking about her. He remembered the calmness in her eyes, the way she had walked past the chaos as if it didn't matter, and how she had focused only on the problem. She had asked simple questions, the kind of questions that professionals often overlook because they are too caught up in complexity. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the answers don't come from experience alone. They come from observation, from noticing what everyone else ignores. Back in the main office, employees were beginning to clean up the mess the crash had left behind. Some were checking servers, ensuring no further issues remained. Others were speaking quietly about the incident, recounting it to colleagues who hadn't been present during the initial panic. Each retelling added new details, and the story of the janitor's daughter became almost legendary in the room. The janitor himself had returned to his duties, quietly sweeping the floors, emptying trash bins, and moving with his usual calm efficiency. But every so often his eyes drifted toward the door. He wanted to make sure his daughter was safe, and that she had not been overwhelmed by the chaos she had stepped into. He had always known she was intelligent and curious, but seeing her handle such a situation had given him a mix of pride and awe. Late in the afternoon, as the office slowly settled back into its normal rhythm, the CEO called for a brief meeting. His employees, still tense but eager to hear what he had to say, gathered in the conference room. He stood at the front, straightening his jacket, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I want to acknowledge something extraordinary that happened today," he began. "Our system crashed and we were all struggling to fix it. But someone, who wasn't even part of our team, noticed something that saved the company from disaster." He paused, scanning the room, and finally pointed toward the door. "The janitor's daughter. She helped us see what we were missing." A hush fell over the room. Some employees looked at each other, stunned. A child helping in a crisis? It seemed almost impossible, but they had seen it with their own eyes. The CEO continued, "I know many of us were frustrated, panicked, or ready to give up. But she remained calm. She observed, asked questions, and pointed out something so small that we overlooked it. And because of her, the system is restored. We are back on track. This is not just luck. This is insight, intelligence, and perspective." The room remained quiet, but a feeling of respect and amazement spread among the employees. They had witnessed something rare, a reminder that brilliance could appear in unexpected places, and that sometimes it didn't come with a title, a degree, or years of experience. Meanwhile, the janitor's daughter, who had been waiting quietly by the lobby, was called into the room. She walked in slowly, her small hands clasped in front of her, her eyes scanning the faces of everyone present. She didn't seem nervous, though she was aware of the attention. She had solved a problem, yes, but she had never sought recognition for it. She simply wanted to understand, to observe, and to do what she could. The CEO approached her carefully, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes at her level. "I don't know if you understand," he said gently, "how important what you did today was. You saved the company from a serious problem. Your observation, your calm thinking. It was remarkable." The girl looked up at him, a faint smile forming on her face. "I just noticed something," she said softly. "I didn't think it was anything special. The CEO shook his head, realizing that this child had taught him a lesson he would never forget. "It's very special," he said. "More special than you can imagine." The meeting ended, but the impact of her actions lingered. Employees returned to their desks, talking quietly about what had happened. Some were still in disbelief. How could someone so young, with no formal experience, solve a problem that had confounded professionals? Others felt inspired, realizing that observation, patience, and fresh perspectives were as valuable as any degree or title. As the day wore on, the office settled into a quieter, more reflective rhythm. The servers were checked repeatedly, each system tested to ensure stability. The employees were still processing the earlier panic, but a sense of calm and relief had replaced the chaos. The CEO returned to his office alone for a moment and thought about the lessons he had learned. He realized that authority and experience, while important, were not everything. Fear, frustration, and pride could cloud judgment and prevent people from seeing simple truths. Today had shown him that insight could come from anyone, even someone who seemed too small, too young, or too inexperienced. Later, the janitor came to collect his daughter. She was tired from the long day, but her eyes still shone with curiosity and calm. She had not expected to become the center of attention or to be praised for solving a crisis. She simply wanted to help, to observe, and to understand. The CEO watched from his office window as they left. He felt a mixture of gratitude and humility. He knew that this day would remain in his memory, not just as a moment of crisis, but as a moment of revelation. A reminder that wisdom and insight could appear in the most unexpected forms, and that those willing to observe and think carefully could change outcomes in ways no one anticipated. Employees continued to talk about her for days afterward. The story spread quietly through the office, shared in whispers and conversations, until it became a symbol of hope, insight, and the unexpected power of calm observation. Even the CEO referred to it during meetings, reminding everyone to look beyond assumptions, to notice details, and to respect perspectives from all sources, no matter how unlikely. The office was quiet now, but it was not the same quiet as before. It was a quiet filled with reflection and wonder, the kind that follows a shock when everyone has survived a crisis and realized how close they came to disaster. Employees moved about their tasks with a different energy. There was still work to do, emails to answer, reports to finish, and servers to check, but the tension that had gripped the office hours earlier had given way to a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. The CEO stood by the window in his office, looking out at the city below. He had spent the morning pacing, shouting, and demanding answers. He had felt powerless in a way he rarely experienced. And now, after seeing the unexpected solution from the janitor's daughter, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: humility. His mind replayed the events over and over, trying to understand what had happened. How had a child who had walked into the office out of curiosity noticed what no one else had? How had she solved a problem that experts had been struggling with for hours? He realized slowly that he had underestimated the simplest, most overlooked qualities: observation, calm thinking, and the courage to speak up. For the first time, he thought not about what he knew, but about what he had failed to see. Downstairs, the employees were gathering quietly in small groups. They were discussing the events, still processing what had just happened. "I can't believe she did it," one whispered. "We've been staring at the screens for hours and didn't notice what she saw immediately." "She's amazing," said another. "She didn't panic. She just observed. It makes you wonder how much we miss when we're too stressed to think clearly." The IT manager had gathered her team together, reviewing every step they had taken during the crisis. She pointed to the specific details the girl had noticed. "This is why she was able to solve it," she said. "Sometimes the best insight comes from fresh eyes. Someone not bound by routines or expectations can see patterns we miss." Meanwhile, the janitor was quietly finishing his work, moving his mop in slow, steady strokes. He had observed the events unfold from the shadows, proud but careful not to interfere. His daughter, still calm, had already returned to the corner of the lobby, sitting on a bench quietly watching the office as if nothing had happened. The CEO decided it was time for a proper acknowledgement. He called everyone into the main conference room. Employees filed in, still in awe of what had just occurred, some whispering excitedly to each other. And then, he looked toward the lobby door, and there she was, the janitor's daughter, standing quietly, her small frame almost lost among the tall chairs and busy adults. He gestured for her to come forward. "I want everyone to see who helped us today," he said. "She saved us from a situation that could have cost the company millions. She solved a problem that none of us could, and she did it with nothing but observation and calm thinking." The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward the girl. Some employees smiled. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A child? How could a child have done what trained professionals could not? The CEO stepped closer to her. "You didn't just notice something small," he said, his voice steady and filled with sincerity. "You gave us the solution. You reminded all of us that sometimes it's the small details, the quiet observations, and the courage to speak up that change everything." The girl looked up at him, her eyes calm and steady. "I just noticed something," she said softly. He smiled, shaking his head slightly. "It was more than that. It was remarkable. I hope you understand how important this was." The employees began to clap softly, a mixture of admiration and relief, though none of it felt like overpraise. It was respect, earned in a single act of insight. The IT team gathered around her, still trying to understand how someone so young had been able to identify the issue so quickly. They asked her questions, and she answered in her simple, thoughtful way, explaining what she had noticed without claiming expertise or authority. The CEO watched the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and humility. He realized that leadership was not just about control or authority. It was about recognizing talent wherever it appeared, even in the most unexpected places. It was about listening, observing, and learning from those who might not seem important at first glance. The janitor came forward, taking his daughter's hand gently. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Before leaving, she glanced back at the room one more time. The employees, still in quiet awe, watched her go. She had not sought attention or recognition, yet her actions had changed the office in ways that no one could ignore. The CEO remained standing in the conference room, reflecting. He realized that fear and pride could blind even the most experienced leaders. He had been ready to panic, to demand solutions, to overwhelm his team with orders, and yet the solution had come from someone he had barely noticed before. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and the unexpected sources of insight. Over the next few days, the office culture began to shift. Employees spoke more openly, shared their observations without fear of judgment, and paid closer attention to details they had previously ignored. The story of what had happened spread quietly through the company, told not as gossip but as a lesson in perspective, calmness, and the importance of listening. The CEO held a private meeting with the IT team. "We need to rethink how we approach problems," he said. "We often rely on expertise and experience, but we cannot ignore fresh perspectives. Even someone young or inexperienced can provide insight that we might overlook." The IT manager nodded. "We've learned that today. It's a lesson we won't forget." Employees began to look at the office in a new way. They noticed small errors earlier. They questioned assumptions, and they became more open to suggestions from everyone, regardless of title or experience. The story of the janitor's daughter became a quiet legend, a reminder that brilliance could appear in unexpected places, and that sometimes the simplest observations could solve the biggest problems. The CEO, meanwhile, often found himself reflecting on that day. He thought about the pressure, the panic, and the lessons learned. He realized that control and authority were valuable, but they were not everything. Insight could come from anywhere, and he needed to remain humble, observant, and open to unexpected ideas. The janitor's daughter continued to visit her father, quietly observing the office and the world around her. She did not seek recognition, but her impact was undeniable. Employees still spoke of her. IT staff often referenced her approach to problems, and the CEO himself occasionally shared the story in meetings as a reminder to stay open-minded and attentive. One afternoon, the CEO called a small team together, including the IT manager and a few key employees. "I want to make sure we never forget what happened," he said. "We need to encourage curiosity, observation, and open-mindedness. If anyone notices something unusual, no matter how small, we need to listen." Today was proof of how valuable that can be. The team agreed, and small changes began. Employees were encouraged to share observations without fear of being dismissed. Managers paid closer attention to small details. The office culture shifted toward collaboration and openness, and for the first time in a long while, The CEO felt a sense of calm control rather than constant stress. Through all of this, the janitor's daughter remained largely unaware of her influence. She continued to visit her father, ask questions, and observe the world. She did not crave recognition, but her actions had sparked a lasting change in a company, reminding everyone that sometimes the smallest voices carried the greatest wisdom. The office thrived in the weeks that followed. Employees worked more efficiently, errors were caught earlier, and collaboration improved. The story of the system crash became a reminder, retold quietly during meetings or when new employees joined. It was a story not about fear or failure, but about insight, observation, and the unexpected sources of solutions. The CEO often looked at the lobby where she had once stood. He remembered the calmness in her eyes, the clarity in her voice, and the quiet determination that had solved the crisis. It was a lesson he carried into every decision, every project, and every challenge the company faced. He had learned to listen, to observe, and to value insight wherever it appeared. Employees still told the story among themselves, each retelling reinforcing the lesson. The janitor's daughter had changed the office not through authority or experience, but through observation, courage, and calm thinking. Her presence had reminded everyone that wisdom could appear in unexpected places, and that humility and openness were essential qualities in problem-solving. The CEO reflected often on that day. He had faced many challenges in his career, but nothing had taught him more about leadership, perspective, and human insight than the actions of a quiet, observant child. She had reminded him that the world was full of unexpected talent, and that even in the busiest, most chaotic moments, there was value in slowing down, observing, and listening. And while the office continued to move forward, tackling new projects, solving new problems, and navigating challenges, the story of that day remained a quiet, powerful reminder. Insight could come from anywhere, and the most important lessons often came from the simplest observations. The janitor's daughter had not sought recognition, yet she had changed the company forever. Employees continued to talk about her, managers adjusted their approaches, and the CEO remembered her words and actions whenever a new challenge arose. She had shown that calmness, attention to detail, and the courage to speak up were more powerful than panic, authority, or experience alone. The office had survived the crisis, but it had gained something more valuable, a new way of thinking, a respect for unexpected insight, and a lesson in humility that would remain for years to come. The janitor's daughter returned to her normal life, unaware of how much she had influenced the people around her. She continued to visit her father, quietly observing the world, asking simple questions, and noticing details that others overlooked. Her actions had sparked a change in the office culture, a recognition that brilliance could appear anywhere, and that humility, curiosity, and calm observation were powerful tools in solving even the most complex problems. The office had survived the crisis, and more importantly, it had learned an invaluable lesson. The CEO reflected on the events over the coming days, understanding that leadership was not just about control and authority, but also about listening, observing, and recognizing talent wherever it might appear. The impact of the janitor's daughter went beyond the immediate problem. It reshaped the way everyone in the office approached challenges, collaboration, and problem-solving. Her quiet presence had reminded them all that even in moments of fear and panic, calmness, attention to detail, and fresh perspectives could make all the difference. And though she returned to her simple life, the memory of her insight and courage lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. The CEO often thought about that day, remembering how quickly everything had changed, how easily panic could have destroyed them, and how a small, quiet observer had brought clarity and resolution. It was a lesson he carried with him into every decision afterward, a reminder that solutions could come from anywhere, and that the smallest voices sometimes had the most powerful wisdom. The office returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of that day became a quiet legend, retold not with exaggeration but with admiration for the girl who had simply noticed something everyone else missed. And for those who,